perhaps later we can talk about the whole issue of sourcing animals, because I know that earlier today we did speak about the extent to which a lot of non-human primates come from China in particular,
Right.
and the ways to assure that their facilities are equal to those in our country. And I know you mentioned that some are ALAC accredited, but for now, again, thank you for doing the regulatory outline. I would like you to talk a bit about your major publications that have been adjuncts, and you've talked a bit about your essentials guide, but I know you've had a hand in some of the seminal publications, and I'd love you to share them with our audience, to be both in terms of your substantial and beyond significant contributions, but also what's available as resources to those into the field circa 2013.
Well, right now there's a huge amount of information. When I got involved with this, when you were studying for your boards, you were using yellowed copies of handwritten notes that were passed down from, from postdoc to postdoc. Well, actually, I have a fair number of publications, and a lot of that has to do because I had a training program, and when you're running training programs, you have young people publishing, which I was able to get some credit for. But I was the senior editor of the first edition of Primate 2-volume set from ACLAM, and ACLAM has played a huge role in terms of the information available. Their Blue Book series on everything under the sun now is probably the best compilation of information on a variety, species related, regulatory related.
Would you mind saying for what the acronym ACLAM stands?
American College of Laboratory Animal Medicine is the board specialty group recognized by the AVMA for people trained in laboratory animal medicine. I think right now there's about 1,000 board certified people around the world by ACLAM, and I can never remember the number that are still active, but it's growing every year in a variety of training programs. All I can say is, unless you're a glutton for punishment, never volunteer to be an editor of anything. That was a painful experience. And when they came back to me and asked me to do the second version, I said, "Are you out of your you-know-what mind?" No way. There's one chapter in that book that I got 3 legal handwritten pages at a time, and I entered, which, given how poorly they were written, actually saved me a lot of time because I could edit them as I went. And there's actually a chapter missing because the author kept telling us it would be there, and I finally got on a plane and went down and said, "I want to see it," and it had never been started.
That's the smoking gun of this interview. That will get edited. Now we need to name names when the camera.
No, I would never do that. But editing is, writing is a lot of. I think I've got 4 chapters I got to finish this year, but writing is a lot easier than editing, I think, because usually it's a smaller thing. You just sit down and do it and get it over with. But then we have some pretty decent publications in there, mostly from the postdocs and stuff, that I think have contributed to their reference in the guide and stuff. So I guess we've added something to the volume of knowledge over the years.
So Taylor, you have been a mentor to so many, even beyond the substantial list of postdocs you've taught and mentored and groomed. But who do you cite as, or who would you consider to be your major mentors? I know you mentioned a Dr. Zimkowski, or I'm probably mispronouncing that name, but yeah. Who else would be, or who would be your mentors? And tell a little bit about each so that they can be in the repository as well, however derivatively.
Well, I think one time I had to accept an award, and so I had to think about these kind of things. Normally you don't. I think there are three, well, my parents for one. I grew up in a hybrid household. I had a Yankee for a mother and a hillbilly for a father, so I'm an F1 hybrid. But so and particularly when you grew up in the South at the time I did, I probably grew up with a little different attitude than a lot of people had. But I think they just, the fact that they allowed us to pursue our own goals and stuff, and I think that was, and we were taught that you judge people for who they are, not what they are. or what they did. And then I had a neighbor who lived next to us. His name was Bates Parman.
Would you spell that, please?
Bates, B-A-T-E-S, Parman, P-A-R-M-A-N. And Mr. Parman had to quit school when he was 15 to support his mother and sister, and he did it by working in a filling station, and at 17 he owned the filling station. And when I went to work for him driving a truck, he was what's called a jobber. He supplied the products for the filling stations, and then we supplied construction companies with fuel oil and all that kind of stuff. And at the time I worked for him, he had 54 filling stations. And what he taught me was service. He didn't care whether you were the biggest client he had or the smallest. Everybody got service. And I think that's a mentality that's missing in a lot of places. I'll never forget, it may have been Christmas Eve. And we had a snowstorm in Nashville. I mean, holy smokes, it was a bad one. And there was this one woman who'd had a 55-gallon fuel oil tank out beside her trailer, and she needed fuel oil, and I was the closest one. So he said, "You got to get her fuel oil." And so we went out there. I went out there and delivered her fuel oil. Actually, I think there were two of us doing it. I can't remember now. But anywho, I wasn't sure we were going to get home, but he didn't really care whether we got home or not. We were driving on the sidewalk for a while trying to get home. But that was his attitude, his service, you know. And I think one of the things that happens in the research environment is people think that because they're the biggest stick on campus, they should get the best service. No, everybody should get the same service. You just get more of it if you use more of it. And so I think that was an important thing. And the other one was my advisor. You know, does it make biological sense? Dr. Robert Epstein, who actually, I believe, was a resident under Paul Thomas when the first bone marrow transplants were done, was my advisor. And Bob was a great guy, great clinician, absent-minded professor sometime. He left and this was, folks, before there were word processors. My thesis on the train more than once when he was reading it. You had to pay $1.10 a page to get the damn thing typed. Does it make biological sense? And the other thing is he really, really cared about the animals. And we were doing bone marrow transplants, and those were rough animal models back in those days, and he really cared about the animals. You were in there to take care of the animals. He was head of oncology and hematology, and he would be in there at 6 in the morning taking care of the animals, because we rotated who came in at 6. So he taught me a lot about research. He made me understand real quickly that my career was not going to be in research. I would be much better at managing than I would be at thinking up new ideas like that. It takes a really special person to think out of the box and move research forward. So it's a lot harder than people think it is. It's a very hard job, and not everybody's. That's why there are a lot more PhDs minted than there are working as researchers. It takes a significant amount of dedication. So. In fact, he also had a very dry sense of humor. I'll never forget, you probably edit this one out, but it was a seminal moment in my career. We had a lot of young medical students wanted to work in our laboratory because those things help you get into the residencies and things. We had a young man, he really, really wanted in this one residency. So he was working in there, and so we met every morning at 7:30. And Dr. Epstein wanted to know whether so-and-so had treated this dog that had had a bone marrow transplant. And he gave him all this information. And then Bob looked at him and called his name and says, "Now, you know, if you're really going to pursue your residency in whatever it was, you really need to determine the difference between the living and the dead state." Because Bob had been in early in the morning and that animal had already passed away. This kid had come in and given it subcutaneous fluids and everything. And we had a 30-minute lecture, spontaneous lecture, on the difference all the things you need to look at to determine the difference between the living and the dead state. And I think there were times my postdocs thought I repeated that lecture on other issues. It was one of these little tongue-in-cheek humor things that I will never forget. It was the most instructive thing I've ever heard. So those are the people I think that if I, I learned a lot from them.
Thank you. So before we continue, I'd again like to ask you to pause and share with us some of your proudest accomplishments. I know there are many, and I'm going to ask you to put your humility aside, put your reticence about tooting your own horn aside, and tell us what you consider to have been, until now, your greatest accomplishments as a professional in this field.
Good question. Well, I think being, first, anything is, I was at the right place at the right time when I ended up staying at the University of Illinois. That wasn't the reason I came to Chicago. I was supposed to go back to Vanderbilt and the VA there and run that program. And the job I thought I was going to get was not the job they offered me, and I decided maybe I wouldn't go there. And because it was just some unique opportunities there. It's a big, complex program, a lot of good people. I think the residency training program, that one I think is important. I think the other one is that my staff saw me mad twice from 78 to 206. And I should have killed somebody both times and didn't. But I think trying to learn to, take things as they come and don't take things personally and just, do your job. But do it in a way that's friendly. I think the other thing is the fact that at our facility, I think when I retired, the average seniority there was almost 20 years. There were a lot of people there that I worked with, and it was because we had a family. BRL was a family, and you treat people well. And I learned that from my parents. It doesn't make any difference what your job is, you are a person. And watching, because of a benefit that was awarded to people who worked for University of Illinois at some point and didn't just apply to faculty, it applied to everybody, is that you got tuition waivers. I watched a lot of the staff, and I hate it when people say my staff, a lot of the staff, kids go on to college. People who didn't graduate from high school and cleaned up after animals their whole life, their kids went on to college. So I think the fact we empowered them, we worked very hard to train them so they could take the ALAS exam, and that was a trial for some of them. So they could get promoted, so they could make a decent living. And, if the veterinarians don't show up, you won't notice it a lot. But if the animal care staff doesn't show up, you will. And that's not the way it started. I mean, when I first started in this business, we didn't know who was going to be there. Day after payday was always a challenge. Heck, they go out for lunch and not come back to work. And so it was kind of an interesting environment for. In fact, there were a couple of times my supervisor and I had to be over at Cook County Jail picking up our people to get them to work. It was the lowest common denominator. Janitors made more than the people cleaning up after animals. So that was, and the other thing I think is, at one point there was, I have to be careful how I say this. At one point, there was an inequity in the pay scale within the university system, and I know that my animal care staff was much better than the place that was getting more money, so I actually went to the union and insisted that I be able to have equity and parity with another union contract, which kind of blew the union away. But they worked hard. They deserved the money. So I think that, being able to have a training program was... those kids did really well. There's a couple of them here, a lot of directors out there now. So, yeah, that's probably it. Surviving. Actually, though, I will say, when I became Associate Vice Chancellor for Research, my boss then asked me to take over something called the Research Resources Center, which was a core facility of 4 research support facilities. And I told her, are you crazy? Because if it had been offered, I'd have never been selected by a search. I didn't know anything about any of that stuff. I mean, I wouldn't recognize most of the instruments if somebody put a picture up on the wall. But for 10 years, I took that unit over, and it was an interesting learning experience. I learned that there are people in academia that make our animal users look like the nicest people in the world. I actually brought in an outside site visit team to evaluate some things, and I won't mention the department, but we had one department which is not usually associated with biomedical research. That, he said he was going home and hug all his faculty in that department after he got back home. But when I left the university in 2006, the RC had gone from 4 units to 14 core support units serving 1,000 faculty, and gone from a rechargeable budget of $200,000 to almost $4 million. So I think we did a pretty good job, and it was all because you provide service. But one of the things that helped in this regard was the fact, I think, that as a laboratory animal veterinarian, well, as a veterinarian, you have to learn, particularly when you work around large animals, you have to learn that, finesse is more important than force, and sometimes you just kind of let them do whatever it is they want to do until they quit doing what it is they want to do, and you can go in there and touch them. And I was in one of this department, the one that I sort of mentioned before but didn't identify. Their department head called me in for a meeting, and I agreed to go over there. And it was the day before Christmas, I think. And it was in this little bitty office, and there were all these faculty crammed in there. And I mean, they were screaming and yelling. I had one guy pushing his finger in my chest and all this kind of stuff. It was kind of interesting. This went on for about an hour and a half, and I just let them vent. And finally, the department head said, do you have anything to say? And I said, yeah, 2 things. The first one is, I've spent the last 25 years dealing with heads of surgery. There's nothing you can do that's going to scare me. And 2, I looked at the department head and I said, I would never allow my staff to treat anybody the way you did. I said, you need to learn how to be a leader. And so then walked out of there, and I figured all hell was going to break loose. It did for a while, but then he settled back down because, after all, I was the associate vice chancellor. In the long run, I had a bigger stick. But working around animals teaches you how to manage people, and that's kind of, you just kind of let them do what it is they do, and eventually they'll get tired.
So that was an amazing catalog of accomplishments, and most of them really are directly traceable to who you are as a person, that fundamental treat people well, service mentality. Does this make sense? All of the things you've told us. But I want to try to just restate what you said in the list, because I think it's so important, and let me know if I missed anything or if I misstate anything. So I wrote down that you were very proud of your residency program.
Yes.
You were
good
very
people.
proud. Oh, pardon me.
They were good people. And also it keeps you young. Yeah, they're always there questioning you, so you can't blow off them. These
You were
kids.
proud of the fact that you treated everyone well. You treated people well. You said that in 30 plus years, maybe twice, you lost it, which is, superhuman by any measure. You were proud of the fact that and again, that was also, you said you maintained your equanimity. You were proud of the fact that you empowered your employees and your coworkers, and you did that in large measure by training them so that they could be promoted, they could make a living wage, and how proud you were derivatively when their children went to college, when most of the parents or many of their parents had made a living by cleaning up after animals, I believe was your phrase.
That was what we did.
Right, and that
veterinarians live in a fecal environment, and so does our staff.
Right, so that you empowered and trained your employees, you treated them well, You talked about your service mentality, and you talked about going to bat for your staff members with the union because the pay scales, or a couple of the pay scales at the university, were inequitable. And you talked about speaking truth to power, in effect, in both that example and context and with respect to the surgical example that you mentioned. And I just want to say for the record, that's an extraordinary recipe for success in any domain, so I just wanted to restate it and thank you for it. So the flip side of success, and you alluded to that earlier when you talked about how in the early years failure was often a good teacher, is always a good teacher, but now with the many eyes peering over one's shoulder and many methods and modes of scrutinizing one's behavior for federal and compliance and many other purposes, failure is not as easy to see as a positive. It's almost always seen as a negative. But I'd like you to think about whether you've had a failure that you might share with us that was a useful teacher to you that you'd be willing to, again, talk about.
Tons of them. Where do you want to start?
Well,
I think one of the things you have to put in perspective is there's a group out there called the Association of Primate Veterinarians. And when it first started, it was called the Association of Primate Veterinary Clinicians, and in order to be involved in that, you had to have responsibility for over, I can't remember, it was 300 or 400, a lot of monkeys. And what we'd have meetings once a year, and I didn't get involved, I wasn't one of the founders, but I did get involved fairly early on. And we'd get together and sit in a room and say, I just did this. Don't do that. You can hurt a lot of monkeys, because we didn't know. Yeah, I think there was an example which was, I mean, it was dramatic at the time. We had some monkeys come in which tested positive. Their blood work showed they had malaria parasites in their blood. And for the study they were going to go on, we had to clear the malaria parasites. And so we called another government agency, which shall remain anonymous, to find out what the latest therapy was for malaria, because this wasn't, I mean, the literature wasn't out there for primates. I mean, a lot of my publications were on non-human primates because there was nothing in the literature. Anything that happened we could publish. And so I figured we were going to treat these, and I was the director at the time, so there were other people actually doing the work. Who should I put in charge of this? So I had a resident who, for their previous training, should have known how to calculate dosages. So I had them calculate the dose, and then they started, and I think there were maybe 24 monkeys in that room. So they started treating. They get about halfway through, and the first one drops like a rock. And then they just start dropping like rocks. That's a veterinary expression. They were having some significant respiratory complications, so it was all hands on deck to get down there and save those monkeys, which we did. It was a long afternoon, and we didn't get home too early that night. And so I figured that somebody, I was ready to kill this resident. And then we went back and refigured it, and he'd been off by a decimal point, but in our favor. Because the advice they'd given us had never been looked at in terms, it never been extrapolated from the human data to non-human primates, and so I learned a lot from that. And one of the things we did because of that was a young woman who was in the College of Pharmacy at the time who'd wanted to be a veterinarian, couldn't because of her allergies, came to see us, and so we put her on the phone calling drug companies who had tested different drugs in monkeys as part of the bringing it to market process, and asked if they would share pharmacokinetic data with us so we could figure out our own dosage. So we created our own in-house formulary, and they were very forthcoming with her. And she did a really good job. But that one was one I go, holy smokes. But that type of thing happened pretty regular back then. You didn't know. There weren't any veterinary books. I mean, there's no drug that you can pick up and say the dosage for a monkey or the dosage for this. So you had to kind of figure it out, and there weren't the Blue Book series from Lab Animal. And so our library probably, when it came to monkeys, had more human books. And it took a while to learn that monkeys, you don't use pediatric books because monkeys pediatric monkeys are pediatric monkeys and adult monkeys are adult monkeys. And so it was a real learning curve. And as I said, I would have had to report that to Nelson. Not Nelson now, it would have been Axel and them if that happened today. And I think one of the problems is when you feel that every mistake is going to be scrutinized and analyzed, that people are less forthcoming when they make mistakes. And one of the things was, I don't care. All I want to know is the truth. I mean, I don't care that you did it wrong. I don't care why you did it wrong. I just want to know the truth so that we don't make the same mistake again. And I think in an environment where every mistake you make could become a strike against you, that people are less forthcoming. And I think that's bad for our environment right now. But then I'm old enough to know that I won't have much impact on the environment anymore, so what the hell.
So I have 3 more questions, and we have about a little bit less than 10 minutes. So the thing that I'm very, very interested in hearing, and I know that hours would not do it justice, but you have been a leader in so many areas. Again, I'm very, very interested in the area of dialogue between those who oppose the use of animals in research and those in the scientific community who obviously support it and rely on it for their both purpose in life and work. So I'd love to know, again, how you've seen and experienced the evolution of the relationship between, and I use that word advisedly, tension between, conflagration between those two sides over the course of your career, and certainly your role in trying to be a trusted broker in that process.
That's interesting. Back when what's now called the animal rights movement was first getting started, there was a real effort, to distinguish animal rights and animal welfare and all this kind of stuff. And I mean, I evolved a long way. I used to teach it one way, and then over the years I learned different things from listening to philosophers and read a lot of stuff. Not that I understood much of it, but I read a lot of it. I was also in a situation where our facility and me personally was one of the first people who was a target of the animal rights groups. On the old FBR list of illegal incidents, I was early. I've always been a little precocial, so what the hell. And but I decided I wasn't going to let that, bother me. I had given a presentation. I should have known better than this. Halloween night at the Anti-Cruelty Society, there was 2 of the young philosophers in the movement, and myself and an investigator, and it was rather an interesting experience. These young philosophers were over there, and my head was spinning. I didn't know what the hell they were talking about. They have a different approach to life. In fact, at one point I got up after they'd done their spiel and drew the canine histocompatibility complex on the blackboard and said, "That's what my PhD is in. Do we want to talk about that?" And so finally we kind of got down to talking about little things. But because of that experience, I decided if you were going to stick your neck out of the foxhole, you better know what you're talking about. So I read Singer and a lot of the other people, and I, over the years, changed a lot of my opinions on this. But I think the problem with developing a true open dialogue, and we've had some open dialogues at Primer. I've been on programs with Andy over the years. In fact, one of the things I've always told vet students when I talk to them is something Andy Rowan quoted to me at he and I were on a program at the University of Chicago right after the first Hastings Center report came out in the 90s with one of the main authors of that, Strachan Daly, I believe is his name. And we're trying to tell the difference between human medicine and veterinary medicine. And Andy said, well, human medicine is preserve life at all costs, and veterinary medicine is to minimize suffering. And that was I use that all the time when I'm talking to vet students and stuff. But I think what has happened is that you went from, you know, the antivivisectionist type, they used to be categories, little old ladies in tennis shoes, and then PETA came along, and PETA was in your face. They have no shame when it comes to making their points and stuff. I think that changed the environment for the whole animal welfare, animal advocacy, whatever environment that you want to call it. And I think that put people at ease. I think that has driven a wedge between trying to communicate. We actually had a session here, which I volunteered to moderate, where we invited the people in, and the first thing that happened was the PETA person loudly proclaimed that she wasn't in there to discuss anything with anything because she didn't believe anything we did was right in the first place, blah, 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 blah. So my job monitoring for the next hour and 15 minutes was to keep people from killing each other. It was kind of interesting, but I think that's changed the environment. I think that's put an edginess to it because, I mean, I didn't know Henry Spira. I met Henry Spira at Priminar meetings. You could talk to Henry Spira and not know whatever you said to him stayed there. I'm aware that there have people come to meetings such as Priminar, opened up their heart in a room, and then had it come back and bite them. I know this for sure because I helped them with it, where something they said, then an organization that was here in the room then asked for information under Freedom of Information Act. So you can't have a dialogue unless you can trust everybody at the table. And I think PETA has changed that because they are willing to do whatever it takes to make their point. I think that has changed how HSUS operates. I mean, everybody's after, you don't exist if you don't get money. And if the organization getting the most press is in your face a little bit, then you got to compete on a level playing field. So I think it's changed a little bit. In fact, it was interesting. There was a little discussion this morning, and a statement was made about what a given organization has on their website. And then the organization says, no, we don't have that on our website, and then criticize the other side of the equation because the research community didn't contribute in a certain campaign we had, blah, blah, blah. And the reality of life is that when they were running that their website did say their goal was to eliminate the use of animals in research. And so that when you get a survey from somebody whose stated purpose is to put you out of business, you are less than likely to cooperate. They've changed it because they realize that you can't have this on your website and then stand up publicly and say you want to have a discourse and get you guys to cooperate. So I think that's part of the problem. I think if PETA was out of the equation, I think it would make a difference, a big difference. And I think I believe that would have been, might have been 3 years ago here that we did that. And that ended, I think, a lot of the people on the programs committee willingness, because it was not pretty. And it's unfortunate because there was a representative from PCRM, and of course Andy was in the room, and the whole thing deteriorated from there. Though it did get to be a little fun there for a while.
Thank you for being brave enough, excuse me, to have taken that on.
Well, I mean, you can watch it evolve. It's not rocket science. It's just there.
So that brings me to my next to the last question, which is perhaps a little self-serving, but since this is the Primer Oral History Repository, I want to first of all thank you for being such a central player in so much of what Primer's done the last 10 years, for co-chairing our meetings for 5 or 6 years.
I don't think it was that long. Beth and I were 3 or 4 in turn. I don't remember. It was so much fun, I can't remember.
You've been on the planning committee for a lot of years. You chaired it for 3 or 4 years. You've been a very central part of these meetings, Taylor. And so I want to know what you think, if any, Primer has brought to your professional life or to the professional or personal lives of the community. I mean, what contributions has Primer made, or what have you found to be most helpful about our mission and our activities.
Well, I think I mentioned a little bit before, I think the format of the meeting is allows people to interact and to ask questions in a pretty much guilt-free environment. I think we've the strength of the meeting is the cake for the meeting are the breakout sessions, and the icing is the other stuff. We've been fortunate over the last few years to have some pretty spectacular icing, which I think leaves people with their walkaway impression. But the take-home messages they usually get are in their interactions with their colleagues and with the people in those breakout sessions. There are times being on the committee we say, why do we have so damn many sessions? And why do I have to do 4? No.
Because you're good.
But the big issue I think is that it provides a relatively safe haven, and I think people. And the one thing that has happened is, with the fewer and fewer animal, whatever you want to call them, animal rights people in the audience, I think people are more free to ask questions they really want to ask. There's a paranoia out there that if I say this, that, you know, before you know it, somebody's going to target my institution. And there are a few of the groups out there that are really good at targeting institutions, you know, through the use of the Freedom of Information Act and some other things. I deal with that on a daily basis with some of our members. So, but once you get in those breakout sessions, people, they don't mind venting their spleens.
Wow, I feel like we could go on for hours and hours, and someday we might start up again. But for now, my final question is, and this is compliments of Gigi, who thought of this wonderful question.
Uh-oh, that can't be good.
Borrow it with permission. Is whether, or the question is, if you could envision or influence a major change in how animal research is done and how IACUCs work, how animals are used in research, how they're treated in the animal care and use programs, lots of different components, but the animal research enterprise writ large. And if resources were not an issue, what would you want to see? What would you wish could happen? In other words, how would you finish the sentence, if only?
Yeah, turn the clock back some. This emphasis on self-reporting and all this type of stuff that's occurred since 2005, and actually the eruption that actually occurred. I mean, I was in a breakout room at a Priminar meeting in San Diego when all hell broke loose over OLA's new reporting guidelines. I mean, I thought I have never felt so much tension. It was worse than some of the union negotiations I was in, and I was on the labor management committee for 20-something years. I've been in some ugly negotiations. I think what has happened with all this, you got to tell us now, you got to tell us now, you got to tell us now, is that you have undermined the ability of the IACUC and the attending veterinarian and those that play a role in managing the program to make use their professional judgments to make decisions based on the institutional environment. And when you do that, when you have to do that, it's difficult to maintain your credibility with the investigators. You're put in a position where, I hate the term, I'm not a rat to be. I don't mean like that kind of rat, but I mean it's not a good. I don't think it's a good thing, and I don't think it's a good thing because I honestly believe that IACUCs and particularly the attending veterinarian can have a lot more impact long term on animal welfare by working with the investigators to educate them, to show them that quality animal care produces better data, to get them to come to you when they've made a mistake because you're their confidant and you're a valued member of the research team and you're not required to turn them in. Then what happens is that animal welfare becomes the driving issue in the program, and it becomes everybody's concern. Veterinarians are put in a very difficult position. I mean, up until 205, I'm telling you, we were cowboys out there doing that. You know, somebody comes to you with an issue, you evaluate the issue, you talk to the IACUC, and a lot of times we just fixed the issue and educated the people, and they never did it again. But now a lot of those things are you got to promptly report them. So I think that changes the environment. I think it changes the open atmosphere of communications that are so important because people are afraid to be open. I think we need a little trust on the part of the regulatory organizations. For example, and this is not a secret, I've talked to the USDA on more than one occasion. I have never been shy about expressing my opinions to the USDA, that their zero defects approach to handling issues with animals. You know, if you've got 3,000 animals and an animal does something you don't expect, and the animal gets injured in the process because you're trying to catch it, I mean, things happen. And the thing is, if you deal with it, fix it, and learn from it, then you're really in compliance, and you shouldn't be cited for these types of things. And so I think will change with the USDA. I would hope that it would change in general, is that you have to work in an environment where people admit they got problems, deal with the problems, and move forward. It's not about finding fault, it's about fixing the problems. And I think that's what I'd like to see, is turn the clock back. I wouldn't want to be I'm glad I've left the university. I don't think I would want to be in the position of having to make the decision that a lot of these people have to make today, because I'd probably get in trouble. Wouldn't be new for me to get in trouble, but
Thank you so much, Taylor. I'm telling you, you have earned your rightful status as senior statesman and straight talker and beloved friend in this community, and we are so privileged to have you part of People in Perspective. So
thank you. This is interesting. This is, you guys, Priminar is an important. What takes place here is important. So it's fun to watch.
You more than watch.
Well, it's fun to watch the light bulb turn on in people's. When you're in one of those breakout sessions, all of a sudden they go, "I can do that." No kidding.